thing is council comments. Does anybody have any comments? Terry.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. I'm excited to begin my 4th term on the City Council. I believe this council is ready to take Tacoma Park government to a higher level of service to the community. We can improve the operation of our government by using a strategic planning approach to the budget process, establishing goals tied to departmental budgets, defining performance measurements so everyone can judge how well we're accomplishing the goals, and implementing new financial management software so staff can monitor their performance to the budget more efficiently and the council can better oversee our operations. We can be more aggressive in protecting city residents' interests by developing stronger lobbying skills, establishing closer relationships with key business and government leaders, organizing city residents to participate on advancing key issues, and selectively using aggressive legal strategies for difficult issues. We can address major challenges with new vigor, completing plans for economic development along the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, focusing resources on reducing traffic impact on neighborhoods and safeguarding pedestrians in our community, creating cooperative programs between city departments to improve public safety and reduce crime, and working to understand and protect the character of Tacoma Park so we continue to be a city of distinction. I feel this last item is very important. Real estate prices and other economic pressures are rapidly changing Tacoma Park. Many residents are finding it increasingly difficult to live in our city. Rather than let the small town character of Tacoma Park merely fade away into memory, I would like us to form an economic diversity task force to assess the situation and recommend policy changes to the council that will ensure Tacoma Park continues to be home to new immigrants, struggling artists, social activists, and retired people, as well as middle-class workers. I cherish our economically diverse community and want us to protect it as long as possible. I ask my council colleagues to support formation of an economic diversity task force. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. You got anything else? Colleen?
Thank you. 2 years ago, I had a lot of things to say about the council and direction and 4 corners of a platform, and got to do a lot of things related to that. And I'm hoping that this time around we focus our efforts a little bit more and try to do things well related to our public safety issues, our youth and family issues, and strengthening our government, our financial capacity, or not financial capacity, our financial fiscal issues, our budgeting issues, some little convenience things like I'd like to see us be able to accept credit cards for our recreation programs and other things. But I'm looking forward to the year and happy that we have 2 new folks who have joined us. I have a couple other issues. I know that the Just Cause eviction piece is coming up soon, and I hope that that folks out there are interested in this. I also noted that there's something coming up before the county, a notice of the actual cost of property taxes when you sell your house, so that the new buyer gets a notice of what the real cost is going to be related to the property taxes, so they don't get a big surprise when the property is reassessed and their housing payment goes up 6 months into their term. And hope that the council will support our resolution to the county council in support of their efforts on this issue. And the last issue is the corner of Ethan Allen and Jackson. It's becoming a spot for impromptu flea markets. There's a big tractor trailer parked there every day or so with cars on it. And I thought that the lot was owned by the church, but I was informed by one of the neighbors that we had a hard time identifying who the lot owner is. But the lot is getting worse and is attracting problems, and there was some thought that there were some folks that were actually camping out there. So it'd be great to know who owns that lot and see what we can do about it. Thank you.
And that's the lot across Jackson from the Martoma Church?
Yes, it's right across from the church and has that funny chain on it. I know that we put a curb cut in there, and that the State Highway Association, I believe, had said that they were going to paint a crosswalk so that when people got off, they could at least have a crosswalk to get into the neighborhood. That hasn't happened yet, but the city did do their part because the state said they wouldn't do it until the curb cut was put in, and the curb cut's in now. So it's kind of another thing that's happening there. But yeah, the lot is attracting trouble.
Anybody else? Okay. You may notice that the next item is additional agenda items / agenda scheduling update. And I wanted to kind of change what that is a little bit to add the scheduling update so that I could just point out to folks as some of the agenda items change, if there's something that I need to point out just to make people aware, either the council or the public. And since this is my first opportunity to do that, maybe if I can just point out a couple of things on the upcoming agendas that will be important for you to note. One of the things that I just want to say about tonight's item on the comprehensive annual financial report is that I think it's real good timing to have this as an introduction for budget matters, particularly for new members, but also for those of us who have been here before to kind of look at that again, and that it's a good idea to have that before we begin our budget discussion. Excuse me. In January. At the December 3rd meeting, there's going to be the Montgomery County Public Schools presentation on the planned renovations at the elementary school, and there will also be a review of the housing affordability programs on that meeting agenda. Then we've got a retreat and some training, and then we go on recess for the rest of December. When we come back in January, we're going to have discussion on January 7th in the first meeting back on the new option D for the auditorium renovation, and then at the same time, while we've got some of the folks who are interested in that here, we will also be talking about establishing a recreation committee as a statutory committee. At the following meeting, we're going to have litigation update, and that will be prior to starting the city attorney's review process. And we'll also have a presentation in that meeting on the resident survey results. Then on the January 22nd meeting, we're going to have tentatively a presentation by the city of Gaithersburg on their Going Green in Gaithersburg. And we'll also have an update from the Committee on the Environment linked to that so that people can try and come for multiple items in the same evening and not split them up over a number of weeks. And then at the last meeting in January, we have our discussion of the budget format and the city manager's quarterly financial report then as well. So that's just a general lay of the land for the next number of meetings. And as things shift around, I will try and keep you apprised of that. The next item is for the record, and I have a mayoral proclamation designating the mayor pro tem, and that will be Doug Barry for this council term. And sure. And the next item on the agenda is the public comment period. And if anybody has any comments directed at anything not on our regular meeting agenda, and since the only thing there is there's a couple of them. Any items on the regular meeting, there will be an opportunity to comment on those as we get to those items. So anything not on the agenda or anything on the work session agenda would be appropriate at this point. And please keep your comments brief to 3 minutes. all those directions and nobody's going to talk. Then the next item is the city manager's comments.
Just two brief items this evening. Some of the council members may recall that PowerMax, which was a subcontractor to James F. Knott Construction, the contractor for the first phase of the community center, had filed suit against the city earlier this year. As I mentioned to the council in prior reports, we were continuing to have some discussions while that litigation was pending. And pleased to report to the council this evening that PowerMax has withdrawn that case against the city. So we were able to work that out amicably. The other item I just wanted to mention to the council is that you may have noticed that the sidewalk to the Maple Avenue pedestrian bridge was undergoing some pretty extensive work today. While we were working on the actually getting the pedestrian bridge itself repaired a couple months ago, the city engineer did note that there were some problems with the sidewalk surface and some trip hazards. So we did have a contractor come in today to address those matters. We anticipate that the sidewalk will be opened up again by the close of business tomorrow. So they were able to get quite a bit of work done by starting early this morning.
Does that include the sidewalk on up around by the corner of Philadelphia Avenue? I notice there's cracks up in that area.
Ms. Braithwaite just walked out. The work that was being done this morning was really just related to the approach to the actual bridge itself.
I'll have to check again, but my recollection was that there were some serious cracks up in the area of the corner of Philadelphia and Macon.
Okay. I'll check with Ms. Braithwaite.
I appreciate that the bridge got done. I'm very glad. There was a lot of comment, about people not being able to use the bridge. One question has come up with the new surface. It's the same wooden surface as before, and given that it's new, it's even slipperier than the previous one. Could you have Public Works look into what it would cost to put, I don't know, sandpaper down on it, something to make it a little less slippery?
Okay, sure. I'd be happy to do that. That's it, unless there's any questions.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you. So the next item is a resolution recognizing Joy Austin Lane for her service on the city council. You want to move it? Here a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. I guess I would like to start out by reading this resolution. We don't normally go through all these, but I think it lays out some of the wonderful things that Joy did on the council, and then I'll take comments, and then we'll have a presentation, and then a chance for a rebuttal by Joy. This is a resolution recognizing former Ward 1 council member Joy Austin Lane, whereas Joy Austin Lane was elected to the Tacoma Park City Council in November 2001 as the representative for Ward 1, and whereas in her 6 years on the Tacoma Park City Council, Councilmember Austin Lane energetically worked for the betterment of Ward 1, actively seeking the input of her constituents on numerous policy matters, and whereas throughout her tenure, Councilmember Austin Lane was an enthusiastic supporter of the arts, advocating for the formation of the city's Arts and Humanities Commission and promoting the creation of an executive director position for the Tacoma Park Film Festival, including initial city funding for the position. And whereas during her tenure, she was a strong voice on pedestrian safety issues and advocated for a formal committee to address these matters, resulting in the formation of the Safe Roadways Committee. And whereas Councilmember Austin Lane actively supported the designation of a portion of the city as a Main Street community and advocated for operational funding by the city in pursuit of the area's continued economic vitality. And whereas during her tenure on the council, she strongly supported the establishment of a skate park in the city of Tacoma Park to provide recreational opportunities for area youth, and where she also worked to make sure that those residing near Montgomery College had a voice relative to the future development of the college, leading to the formation of the Montgomery College Neighbors Advisory Committee. And whereas during her tenure, she worked diligently to protect transportation access at the Tacoma Metro site, and where she was a strong proponent of cross-jurisdictional collaboration with the District of Columbia on numerous issues, and whereas Councilmember Austin Lane decided not to seek re-election in the fall of 2007 and left office on November 19th. Now, therefore, it be resolved that Council of the City of Tacoma Park hereby recognizes the contributions that Councilmember Joy Austin Lane has made to the City of Tacoma Park during her 6 years of service on the Tacoma Park City Council. And I'd just like to start out by saying that Josh has some pretty big shoes to fill, because nobody worked harder for her constituents, not only in the ward, but in the city and in the larger community than Joy. And this resolution just points out some of the areas that you've spent so much time with. And we're going to continue to deal with some of these issues. In many cases, it was getting initiatives or programs started, and they're going to continue to need a lot of work, and I know that you're still going to be around. And I'm not calling on you to put in anywhere near as much work as you did before, but we may call on you for your expertise or your help in working through something that you've put in so many hours on. And I hope we can at least make the request. and we'll understand your happiness to be able to put as much time as you devoted to the residents of this city into other pursuits, your family, your work, and all those other important things that maybe got a little short shrift in the last 6 years and that deserve so much of your attention now. And we really appreciate the work that you've done and the effort that you put in. It's been outstanding. Other comments?
Yes, I had the pleasure of sitting at Joy's left hand for 4 years over there down the, and I couldn't help during that time to be very impressed by what a sharp intellect she has and her ability to cut to the heart of the matter, and excellent questioning of witnesses here, and not to mention the tremendous enthusiasm and energy she brought to the job. So I'll remember all of those things, and we'll miss being her elbow mate over there, but we'll at the same time very glad that she will remain active in the community, and I know that I could call upon her if I needed some advice on the city and its many challenges, and so I'll really miss Joy, and look forward to seeing you around town.
I have to really thank Joy for how much I learned from her. I found it was really impressive to watch Joy work through the various issues. Her dedication to her constituents was a model that I hope to attain someday. Her dogged approach to persistently following an issue until she was able to gain what her constituents wanted and needed was impressive, and I really I thank Joy for what I've learned from her and how she approached the subjects in multifaceted ways, and yet always kept working towards the final goal, which was to get what her constituents wanted. And I thank you, Joy. I'll miss you.
Comment?
I'll miss you also. I'm the only woman left on the council, and I feel a little bit abandoned. When I was getting ready to run for office and was watching the various council members, I definitely watched you and took note of your approach, and that it's possible to come up and really have the courage of your convictions and push them forward, and your I think support for your constituents and those values speaks for itself. And I really enjoyed my time with you. And like Bruce, I hope to see you around as we work on our various issues that the city faces. And good luck to you.
Josh?
I would say a big thank you to you for your service, and then also personally. You encouraged me in many ways to investigate and then run for office here in Tacoma Park, and take the step to engage more publicly. and I greatly appreciate that. And I think it's, as you've done on many issues, you've worked very hard and spent time that people don't see behind the scenes to bring me up to speed on issues, to make sure that I understood everything that I would need to at the beginning to get a running start, and I do have big shoes to fill. So I'm deeply appreciative to you for that. And I think, you know, there aren't public opinion polls, but I did go around and knock on almost every door in Ward 1, and there was a resounding, very high praise for you. So your approval ratings are off the charts in Ward 1. And all the constituents, I think, really do thank you for the 6 years you spent up here advocating for them, working for them. There are unfinished things that you started, and I intend to finish those things and carry forward your intentions in that way and achieve great things also for the residents of Ward 1. So thanks so much, Joy.
I just have two things. I don't want to belabor this too much because they've all said all the good stuff. But two things I want to thank you for. One is your very honest appraisal of how much time it takes to be a council member. I asked early on, and you filled me in. And Mark was totally wrong, who said, oh, no, a few hours here and there, you know. Thank you, Joy, for the realistic view. And the other was just, you know, your willingness to stand up for, you know, positions you hold dearly and speak forcefully for them. Is a great model for me to see that. I really appreciate that, and I hope to try to do that myself. And so I thank you for your service also.
I was involved with the Business Association in Old Tacoma for a number of years. I was drawn in by Jan Schwartz, who tagged me as somebody to follow up parking, a very fascinating subject, which is at the core of things, a lot of things. And Joy, that was in large part your award, the part of the Business Association that's in Old Town. And I watched you come to those meetings and put out good ideas and push us in the Business Association to adopt things that were meaningful and progressive and brought the Business Association together, which is, in my mind, a very important thing. And I think, and I know in a lot of other people's minds too. So I appreciate your efforts there.
And would anybody else like to make any comments?
Good evening, members of the City Council. I am Kathy Porter, and I live on Elm Avenue. And I just wanted to say, having served with Joy for 6 years on the City Council, all of the things that were mentioned in your resolution are all very much true. But what I particularly appreciated was your dedication to your job and to your constituents in Ward 1. All this in spite of the fact that at the time you had a young and growing family. And so in spite of all the demands on your time, I know that you put a very high priority on the work you did for the council, and for that I thank you very much. It certainly made me feel up there as if the people in Ward 1 were well taken care of, so I did appreciate that. And I wish you well in your future endeavors. And now, unfortunately, I have to run because I have a SASCA meeting this evening also.
Seth Grimes, Willow Avenue in Ward 1. Joy, let me add my voice to in support of the Council's resolution and personal thanks to you for your years of service to the ward. Let me also add thanks to Chris, Kate, and Ben for the sacrifices they made in order to enable you to serve the ward and the City of Tacoma Park. I just want to add on one particular subject, noting the work that you've done for public safety. That means for crime and public safety issues around the Tacoma metro area, work that's dated back to the Joint Crime Task Force, working in conjunction with people from the District of Columbia, work also that you did in conjunction with people in D.C. on the Tacoma metro development issue, and then work on rail transport of hazardous materials. I think that those things are not always very sexy. They're often very difficult, almost intractable problems because of the constituencies outside governmental entities that you're dealing with. And you made an extremely strong contribution to the point where some of those things never would have gotten off the ground without your assistance. So again, my thanks to you and to the family.
Hi, I'm Betty Jones. I, for the last 6 years, off and on, have shared the presidency of the now Victory Tower Retirement Center, of which Joy, I think, may have missed 1 or 2 meetings in all of the time. And she cares about seniors. And we all knew that. And I want to tell you, Josh, you have a hard act to follow, but I'm sure you'll be able to do a good job because I'm sure she's filled you in on how diverse our population is and how much she cares about us. And I just want to say that Ann's someplace between BWI and Colorado, I guess. So I just want to say for all of us, Joy, thank you so much. I want to thank your lovely family for sharing so much of her with us. And we're going to miss you terribly. So every once in a while, if they allow you to, peek in and say hi to us, would you please?
Hi, I'm Catherine Tunis, and for those of you who couldn't hear that, and I didn't hear all of it, and those at home couldn't hear it, but there was another resident of Tacoma Towers thanking Joy for her service, very sincerely. I'm a resident of Ward 2. I'm also a committee chair for one of the committees in the city, and I've had the pleasure of watching Joy's children grow up, and also seeing her work on the council and working with her on the council on a number of issues. And I really wanted to say that Joy didn't just think about Ward 1, that she did think about the whole city. She thought about a number of environmental issues and was, people called her a great intellect. She really had a way of getting at, asking questions to get at what is the heart of the matter and how can we make good decisions. Seth mentioned the one thing that I was going to mention, which is the transportation of hazardous materials, especially after September 11th of 2001. This became an issue of national importance, and I think that Joy was one of the first people to raise that issue with the transportation of rail cars and rail chemicals right through the town, and D.C. picked it up. And I'm not sure exactly where we stand right now, but I really want to say that she's a visionary. She's not only thinking about each citizen, but thinking of the broader picture and how we protect our town, and then how those issues are more broadly applied nationwide.
I'm Chris Austin Lane of Spruce Avenue. I just wanted to say thank you to Joy. We've been together for about 21 years. We met in college in a sort of burst of idealistic feminist fervor to change the world. And as one goes out into the world, it proves often stubborn to change sometimes. And when Joy ran for office, it seemed like she has renewed my faith in the ability of people to make a difference in the world. And that she's touched many people, some of which I know, many of which I don't know. But she's definitely renewed my faith in the ability of people to get involved and to make a difference. And I thank her for that renewal, and I hope everybody carries that on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Howard Cohn, Jefferson Avenue. When a person takes on public life, you must have many qualities. You must be tireless, and you must be able to cope with a lot of stress, and you must be able to find your way out of political corners. And Joy has those qualities. She's survived and excelled in a very tough job in Ward 1. But I want to, and a little bit of a departure, want to put on the public record what I know about the rest of her life for the last 6 years. When I first met Joy, she was stuck away for hours at a time in tiny rooms where she was working on a complicated numbers crunching PhD. The word ordeal comes to mind. But she finished that PhD, and now she is off in a full-time job commuting 9 to 5 every day to Virginia. But when she was back here, she did many other things. She went to Rockville and to Annapolis to testify on behalf of city projects. She made herself valuable to other politicians seeking higher office, notably Valerie Irving, whose campaign Joy worked on, and Valerie now on the city council, county council, and it's always in our interest to have friends in Rockville. As mentioned, Joy has been as Chris has mentioned, I should say, Joy has been a wonderful partner to him for many years. She's been, I know this, a wonderful mother to her 2 kids, a soccer mom, a school mom, a karate mom. And Joy herself grew up as an adopted daughter in a family, wonderful family, but about sometime a little more than a year ago, Joy went on a search for her birth mother, a woman whose name at that time she did not even know. And that search ended in a very happy success. And so today Joy has a second mom and a lot to catch up on. In sum, I think Joy, the private person, is just as remarkable as Joy, the public person, and I'm pretty sure she's not done yet.
If there's anybody else, and then we'll vote on the resolution and make the presentation, and then you get your chance for rebuttal. So we've moved it. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. I'm not going to call for any no's. There aren't any. And if you want to come up, and I'll present you with the formal presentation of the resolution. And you get to be surprised, because you're the first one who gets one of these. A little something to represent and remind you of the time that you put in here. I'll come around.
It has a cuckoo, but it only comes out on Monday nights.
Thank you, Joy.
Where was Chris with these cameras?
Oh, and Joy, there's a box and container up here that you can carry that home in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the chance to just say how much I appreciate this recognition. And as you all know, who have worked with me, while I've been on the city council. It has been a labor of love. I've totally enjoyed it and thrived on it, and my family could see that early on, and they were generous with the amount of time they let me devote to it. So I've really benefited during the last 6 years. I have some notes that I have added to the resolution, but I recognize that you may not want to have any addendums at this point. The couple of thoughts that I had before I came tonight were just about change and how that's what I love the most about this job, is being a change agent. The work of a council person or a mayor or any other elected official involves that nexus between what was and what will be. And I believe that that is where we have to devote ourselves to what voters want, not special interests, but voters. I've really tried to do that, and it's so nice to hear from the people that have spoken that that was obvious and that was seen for what it was. It really has been my motivation, and I think Chris and I both have had our faith in government restored through this process. I've always believed in good government, but never really knew how it worked. And by being on the city council, I've learned so much, and I hope I've given a little bit too. I did want to say one interesting quote that I saw in a movie recently. A little chef named Remy, Kate, said that change is nature, and it's the part that we can influence, and it starts when we decide to go forward. And I really hold that belief in the world to be right up there to you all, because I know you're going to continue doing this work, and I hope that that you get as much out of it as I have, because I think that the world that we live in can be so much more, but it's really only because the decision makers insist on it. I want to thank my family and friends. To my husband, you inspire me. And the reason I can do so much and have been able to devote so much time to this, in spite of the work that I've also had going on, is because of you, and I appreciate it. To my parents and my in-laws and my friends, I thank you all a million. I want it to never be said that a wife and a mother shouldn't be in government. I hope that in the 6 years that I've been a council person, I had one child before and I had one child during, and really I didn't find any reason to miss a beat. So that, you know, my children are hopefully a testament to the fact that it's exactly right for women to be decision makers as well as men. I do want to also recognize what Howard mentioned, and that is that Suzanne Weston is our newest family member, and she and I were separated 40 years ago, and I had a wonderful family, the Austins, who raised me and helped me develop the character that I have today. And I've been very honored to be a part of that family. But what's true that I've found of adoptees is that you have this duality. You have the family that you're with and the family that you're not with, but both of them are very important to your identity. And so to Suzanne, thank you so much for joining our family and making yourself such a special part of our life. Lastly, I just want to thank my colleagues and friends on the City Council. I appreciate the dedication with which you will continue doing your work, and I can't say enough about the time and attention and energy that I've seen you all put into the work that you do. I know that this city is lucky to have you, And I think that because of your very good motivations and your belief in good government, you're doing great things for the community that we live in, and I appreciate it. And I think my kids have been a little nervous tonight because they're not sure if I'm going to stay or if I'm going to go, but I am going to depart and thankfully spend some much-needed time with my family. But I really do appreciate this lovely gesture of recognition. It's really been just perfect. Thank you.
Joy, if you want the container. The next item on the agenda is the auditor's presentation on the FY07 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report.
While everyone's getting situated, I'll take a brief opening comment. There is a requirement both in state law as well as in the city's charter that an independent audit be conducted each year of the city's basic financial statements. The firm retained by the city to conduct that audit is Clifton Gunderson LLP. And I'd like to introduce Keith Novak with Clifton Gunderson. He's a partner in charge. Eris Coleman. And especially for those new council members who may not have had a chance to meet her, this is Yvonne Brooks, the city's director of finance. And with that, I will turn it over to either Keith or Eris.
Okay. Good evening. We've got a number of things we'd like to go over tonight. You have a number of pieces of paper in front of you. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is just go over a couple of points. One, the audit was performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and governmental audit standards. Generally accepted audit standards require that we give an opinion on the fairness of the financial statements as they're presented in all material respects. What that means is we are looking at the items from a material standpoint, not from a 100% accuracy standpoint. Our tests are designed to look at material items and items of highest risk. We perform tests. We do not audit 100% of every transaction that goes to the city. If you think about it, it took 365 days to get all the transactions in and a multitude of people to do it. If we were to audit 100% of every transaction, that would take us a considerable period of time, and we wouldn't be sitting here tonight. We'd probably be sitting here a year from now. We also take a look at the accounting principles and policies that were employed during the year for a couple of things. One is consistency. Were there any major changes during the year? If so, were they warranted, and what are the effects on the financial statements? There were no changes in accounting policies or principles this year, with one exception, and that exception was the inclusion of infrastructure assets into the financial statements this year as required by Government Accounting Standards Board number 34, which actually was implemented about 5 years ago, but gave the ability to defer the inclusion of those assets for a 5-year period of time. This was the year that it had to be included. So that is one change during the year. There are some estimates that are made in the preparation of the financial statements, such as the allowance for doubtful accounts, the depreciable lives of assets, and the methodology used for depreciation. Our job is to review those estimates from a standpoint of, are they based on sound reason? Are they based on generally accepted practices? And are they implemented according to the basis that is being used? While we do not conclude on whether they are the appropriate methodology to use, we do look at them from the standpoint of do they make sense, and we didn't have any problems with any of those. We didn't have any significant audit adjustments. As a result of the audit, we didn't come up with adjustments. Now, during the audit, management from time to time identifies certain things that need to be adjusted during the audit period. Those would be management adjustments, but pure audit adjustments are things where we find that an adjustment needs to be made as a result of the work that we performed. We didn't have any disagreements with management. We also were not sought out prior to our retention for purposes of how we would handle certain items. Management didn't come to us and say, we'll hire you only if you do X, Y, and Z. So we came into it with a totally independent point of view, and we had no baggage with regard to that. What I'd like to do now is just briefly, and I mean very briefly, go over the financial statements, just to highlight the fact that these are a comprehensive annual financial report which gets submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada for an award. You did receive the award last year, which is called a CAFR. It's kind of the good housekeeping seal of approval with regard to financial reporting in governmental entities. That certificate is only good for 1 year. These financial statements, as I understand it, are being submitted for the award again this year. The only true part of these financial statements that are my firm's is on pages 9 and 10, which are the auditor's report. And in our report, we once again are giving the city a clean opinion, an unqualified opinion, basically saying that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects. So this is the highest level opinion that can be had. Again, the only major change in the financial statements this year is the addition of infrastructure assets. And by infrastructure, we mean things like roads, sidewalks, I'm trying to think of some of the others there, bridges, things of that nature that previously had not been reported as fixed assets and depreciated. That amount was about $4.2 million this year. While that's a significant amount of money, keep in mind it's roads, bridges, and sidewalks, things that you can't readily sell and things that aren't readily removed from the city. That's really all I wanted to go over with regard to the financial statements, unless anyone has any specific questions. With regard to the financial statements, since they are prepared in accordance with government audit standards, we have a separate report that we also have to issue, which I believe you have a copy of, called the Independent Auditor's Report on Internal Control over Financial Reporting and on Compliance and Other Matters based on an audit of financial statements performed in accordance with government audit standards. It's a nice short title. This report terminology has changed a little bit from prior years. In the prior years, we had used terms like reportable conditions to report items that are of a significant enough nature that they really need to be taken care of. Back in December of '06, audit standards changed, and they changed that terminology. And the terminology changed from reportable conditions to significant deficiencies. I guess they wanted to really hit home how significant we felt these were. So you will see some new terminology. Also during the year, we were requested to take a little bit more of a look in one area, and that is the police evidence room. And that's where most of these comments stem from. With that, I'll turn it over to Eris to just go over those comments.
Good evening. I guess as Keith already explained the overview of the letter, I'll just go through some of the, I guess I'm going to find concerns that were noted during our review of internal controls. Item number 1 on page 2 it refers to the police evidence room. Item, I think, 1, 2, and 3, all the items, I believe, relate to the police evidence room. Just to go forward, we have already discussed these with management, the police chief, and so when we come to you, we also are going to have some views that were presented by the police chief as far as what remedies may be put in place to alleviate these concerns. The first one was monitoring of the seized property. We reviewed the process of assets coming in and how they are, the controls over logging those assets in, as well as being able to identify and distribute those assets to their to the owner or the city, whichever is determined by the court of law. We noticed that in this process that although the items are logged in accurately as they're coming in the door and they are placed in a secure area, there wasn't any kind of periodic monitoring of what was in this room. So you have a situation where in January, items came in from a police officer, they were logged in, they were categorized, they were placed in a locked room. It may be 3 or 4 years from now before something is done, or if nothing is done with these particular assets, and from time to time, the police department did not do a periodic check to make sure that an asset that was logged into this particular asset room was still there. So what your concern is that inappropriate use, items that may go missing, if the defendant is not released, maybe the item is not turned over to the city. Those are some of the concerns that could evolve from just not doing a periodic review of just, if I have this in my books, just make sure it's still in the room. We did do a test of that, and during our test, we did pick items that were in the asset room and trace them to the log book. And then we also just took items that were listed in the log book and traced them and located them in the asset room. And we had no concerns there. I think in management response, one of the remedies was to hire an additional person, an evidence and property clerk. And what this person would do, they would be responsible for receiving the assets from the police officer and also maintaining the custody of assets in the asset room. But then you have an additional person free, which I believe would be the Director of Administrative Services, who will be able to do this independent review from time to time, because this person would be independent of the whole asset process. They should not or will not have access to the lockbox where the items are brought in, or keys to the safe, to the locked asset room, or to combination to the safe. So they avoid of the whole intake and safeguard process, so they would be the individual who would do the periodic monitoring of the assets. The second item was this disorganization of the police evidence room. I previously stated that we did testing of the assets that were in the evidence room, and we had no concerns. However, items were disheveled. It's a possibility things could get lost. If someone wanted to do an independent check, they may not be able to find certain items just because of the actual upkeep of the room. In discussing this with management and the police chief, this additional person, which would be the property clerk, was supposed to alleviate that, because this individual full-time position would be to maintain the organization of this particular evidence room. And the last item dealt with the cash that was maintained in the police department safe. As I explained the process briefly, that when officers come in with property, whether it's cash or property, cash is stored in the police department safe. Prior to recent procedure changes, the cash was maintained there in the police department safe until the case was adjudicated, because therefore, if the individual was to receive the funds back, it's easier. The police just come in, sign the paperwork, the funds are returned to the defendant. If not, and it was stated the defendant does not receive the cash, then these funds were supposed to be remitted to the finance department to be to be placed in the escrow account. During our review, we noted that the police department had not remitted the cash to the finance department as the procedures had stated. The cash for some time now had just been collecting in the safe of the police department. During the review, the new police chief did do an audit of the cash, and we also reviewed the audit that was done of the cash by the police department, and all of the cash was able to be traced to cases that are still ongoing in the court. So we don't anticipate any of the money is missing for some reason, just was sitting in this safe. When discussion with the police chief and management, new procedures were put in place to where all cash will be remitted to the finance department. The police department has elected not to maintain any cash in the safe in their department.
Okay. Any questions on those items? Sir?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, and one not just specifically to that, and I don't know if it's appropriate this time, but this is directed, more of a comment directed to our mayor. And I'm frustrated again this year, as I have been in past years, that we got an 85-page financial report for review the day before a holiday weekend, and we're supposed to be prepared to ask questions and give comments on this. We got two papers today that we're discussing and needing to have questions and comments on. Again, I hope in future years we're able to get these a week ahead of time, so we have some time to prepare for the discussion. That's possible. It hasn't been in the past, but maybe in future years it will be. But more on the topic, I guess the next question is for the city manager, and that's I'd like to know what the status is of the criminal investigation of the property area that began several months ago.
I believe I had notified the council, I think, when that was concluded. I think that's been approximately 30 to 45 days ago. I provided the council with a copy of the report of the Montgomery County Police Department. As Ms. Coleman indicated, their finding was that there was no criminal wrongdoing, or basically just the same issues that Ms. Coleman cited in terms of a need for better organization. For those new members of the council, I'd be happy to provide you with a copy of that report if you would like.
Thank you. Mr. Gunderson?
Novak.
Novak.
Yeah, Mr. Gunderson is long since passed.
I wanted to, I was curious how many years that you all have been doing the auditing of the city's records.
Clifton Gunderson has been doing it since June 30, 2004. Prior to that, it was a firm, Wooden and Benson, who had merged into Clifton Gunderson, and they had been doing it approximately 5 years, 5-6 years prior to that.
I'm curious, and again, trying to understand your explanation at the beginning of kind of the work that you do and the work that you don't do in performing the audit. And I'm curious how an area such as the police property can go unexamined, or apparently problems going on there in the management of that, the finances in that area, and that isn't detected by you to be a problem.
Well, from as I mentioned earlier, we look at things that are considered material and have a material impact on the city. And we did not consider that an area that was material in nature. We had seen material items come through there in the past, and they had always been properly recorded. And we had no reason to believe that there were any problems based upon our reviews of procedures that were going on. We don't take a hard look at every area every year. We cycle through the areas. The last time we had looked at that area, we didn't have any real concerns with that area. When you brought up the concerns that you had, we looked at it as quickly as we can. I mean, when we do our audit, when we plan our audit, we plan to look at different areas and we focus on different things every year. Input from management, input from council is vital in our being able to determine areas that you think there might be an additional area for us to look at. I can also tell you this, audit standards have changed such that our whole approach to this audit is going to be totally different next year. Basically, the whole approach to every audit that every firm does is going to change next year and become much, much more risk-based than what we've been doing up to this point in time. So some areas may surface in the future. Quite frankly, with regard to police seizure assets, the concern normally is that they sit in a deferred revenue account too long, that the case is adjudicated and that the money is not recorded as a revenue on the books of the jurisdiction. And we did look at the age of items that were sitting on the books from year to year, but again, we didn't determine that to be a material area.
Okay, thank you. And part of this is not criticism; it's trying to understand the process. Sure. And my understanding and my view is that the audit, as an independent audit, is something that should be directed by the council, and not by the city manager, city management.
Well, when I mentioned management and the council, it was not to insinuate that management is telling us what to look at. We sit down with management and we talk to them about what's happened during the year. We also do interviews and discussions with employees to find out whether they know of any issues that are going on that management may not be telling us about. We also, I believe we contacted one or two of the council members as well to talk to find out whether there were any issues.
That's specifically one of the things that I would like us to maybe include in the contract for the future is that you specifically address the council for issues prior to conducting each annual audit.
Be more than happy to. Prior to the audit, at any council meeting you'd like me to come to, I'll be more than happy to come. It would preferably be in a closed-door session, an executive session that wouldn't be open to the public or to management so that we can discuss any matters that you may have. That way no one will know where we're heading when we go to do the audit. Because the last thing we want to do is let everybody know what we're planning on looking at.
And again, I want to clarify that I'm not suggesting, that there are improprieties within the city government. I'm talking more about what I think is a good way of doing business.
Sure.
And then one last area of question, and that is in the property disposal. And again, I'm not sure whether you're the right people to talk to about this, but one of the concerns that I felt as we've talked about the property management in the past has been, how is that property disposed of? And two parts to that. One is there's certainly some types of property, such as drugs and guns, that should be destroyed and properly accounted for with receipts from the destroyer and the destroying agency. But the other part of it is for valuable property, of how that's disposed of so that the city benefits from revenues from that. And I guess the third part is making sure that if it is someone else's property, that the city takes the proper steps to find the proper owner so that property can be returned to the proper owner. Is that an area where you did any research?
When we looked at the internal controls for this area, we went over the disposal process as well. I guess And let me just preference what I'm saying by there's a new police chief. So a lot of the procedures that we are talking about that have been in place may not have been consistently applied by the older police chief. So I can speak to you about things that are going to go forward, but may not have been done prior to that because of just for whatever reasons. Most of the property, as far as, I know when you and I spoke to talk about cars and things, the city really was junk. It had no value. It was kind of just sitting around for whatever reason, and the new police chief had a concern as well. So when we were talking with him during this interview for this process, for this review, he also had a concern that the city had a lot of abandoned vehicles. I can't say when they were collected if they were of value at that time, but when we're talking about now, it was really no value to them. So what the police chief decided to do was to try to, things that were junk, get them, sell them as scrap, try to start anew, and you actually follow the process, the procedures. The procedures that are in place are any of these items that are turned over to the city because they are been forfeited by the owner. If they are of value, then an auction of some type would occur, and the city would reap the benefits of whatever proceeds were given for that asset, as well as disposal of drugs and guns. When we were doing our review, we did note that drugs were in a secure area. They were locked up behind lock and key. There was a record of the items that were in there. So they are being maintained in a secure area. And I think going forward, the new police chief, basically has stated that the procedures that are in place will be followed consistently and will be implemented. So we always can go back and take a look later to see if they are actually being consistently followed. But this is just going forward.
Okay. No, I thank you, and it's reassuring to hear that you didn't find any serious improprieties as you look through it. But on the other side, that it sounds like maybe with new controls and new procedures in place, that the city may realize some revenue that we have been overlooking over the past few years.
I think the new police chief agrees.
Yeah. With regard to disposal of guns and drugs, that would be something totally outside of the audit. Those are procedures that are internal to the police and would not be something that we would necessarily be looking at. With regard to disposal of property and the conversion of that property into cash, that would be something that would be under purview of the audit. I do know in the past where there have been significant seizures of both cash and property, the cash and the property had previously been remitted to the city.
Yes, I've seen the...
Because I actually witnessed one or two of the auctions of some rather interesting things, and I was present during one of the cash counts of a very, very large amount of money that came in. So I do know that there were procedures there, and it had been followed for a number of years.
Thank you.
Certainly.
A couple quick things. One, I would like to thank Terry for bringing the police evidence room and related matters to council's attention, and I appreciate that the police and the city manager have in fact taken rapid and thorough efforts to correct those things. And then I have a more substantive question on page 14 and 15 of the report. You list the government activities, and there are some rather large changes towards the bottom of that on those little tables there. And in the text, you report them in more detail. It says that the city has received operating and capital grants and contributions from other government and organizations in the amount of $4.4 million on page 15. And I note that in 2006, that amount was $6.2 million. To me, that seems like a pretty substantial decline. Did you come up with some information as to what happened? You or the city manager?
It may be related to the community center grants that we got in the past that we don't continue to have. And the amount of the federal funds have been decreased over the last couple of years.
And grants tend to be very volatile depending upon what you're doing. You did have a major construction project with the community center going on. There was a lot of grant funding from a lot of different grant sources on that. That would probably be the most significant item. But throughout the years, there have been things like the revitalization of Tacoma Langley, which got significant funds one year and didn't get anything the next. So it really ebbs and flows with what's going on within the city limits and what projects are occurring.
And does that intergovernmental line under the general revenues, that includes the income, well, what to call it, the money from the state as a result of the income tax, 17% income tax? Is that where that shows?
Part of that would be that, yes.
Yeah, part of that is that. Okay, thank you.
If I can just make sure that, did you want to say anything about this other?
Well, I was going to get to that, but we can, if you'd like to finish talking about the statements first, we can certainly get to that last. How would you like me to do it?
Maybe if you want to do that one.
Okay.
And then we'll, that way,
come back.
We don't have to circle back and do other questions.
No problem. All right, the last item you have is what we call a management letter. Auditors are not allowed to write good things. We're only allowed to say bad things, which makes us all depressed. I mean, it's kind of a depressing industry. But the first letter you got, where we talked about the police evidence room, were things that we consider to be significant deficiencies. Okay, those are internal control weaknesses that are severe enough that they rise to a certain level that you really need to take care of them and do something about them. Generally, there's not a good back-end control to them. The items on this last letter, this management letter, are just some minor things that came up during the audit that we think should be communicated to management and to the council so that corrective action to the extent that can be taken. The first one has to do with review of journal entries. Basically, the Director of Finance has the ability to prepare, approve, and post journal entries. Now, if she had access to actual assets, cash, things of that nature, and could influence that system, it would be much more of a concern. But our concern here is that there's really nobody looking over her shoulder to make sure that the journal entries that are being put into the system are proper. So we suggested, and we understand that the city's going to hire another employee in the finance department whose job is going to be to prepare journal entries, and then the finance director will approve them, as she should be. Basically, it's an issue of not enough people in the department at this point in time. We also noticed that during the year, there were some retroactive pay increases that occurred. People paid to bring their pay up to where it should have been. And when that occurred, we didn't notice that the 2% State of Maryland employee contribution was withheld from the retroactive pay. Again, not a significant amount of money, but something that should be occurring. So we suggest that the city review the payroll process for deducting pension contribution from retroactive pay to make sure it occurs. Like I said, not material, not something that's going to cause a major problem, but something that should be addressed. And then the last thing has to do with passport fees and the way the passport fees are being processed. again, the city can't be sure that all the fees that are collected by the city were remitted to the finance department. But again, not a material item, not a material amount of money, but something that should be addressed. And management has indicated that the processing fees are being paid directly to the finance department now to ensure that they get into the books. The fee's not a huge fee on a per passport basis, and the number of passports that have been processed in the past have not been significant. However, with all the new laws with regard to travel overseas, travel into Mexico, Caribbean, Canada, et cetera, we fully expect an increase in passport applications. So tightening this up will be a good way of ensuring that the city gets everything that it's entitled to. So those are the only other items that we have. Like I said, we're only allowed to say the bad stuff. And keep in mind, there are a lot of people that put a lot of transactions through the system this year, and these are only the ones that we noted needed to be brought to your attention. There were numerous transactions that occurred, and a lot of time and effort that went into making sure the numbers in the financial statements were right before they even got to us, that we're not allowed to write letters about.
Thank you. Colleen?
I have two questions. Sorry. I have two questions. The first one is about page 18, and this may be a question that the city manager has to answer. But under the comparison of program revenues versus expenses, I guess I'm surprised by the one for Public Works, because I always thought that Public Works was one of those areas where it cost about as much as we got back in rebate dollars and other fees. I certainly didn't expect this, which looks like $4 million going out and only $500,000 coming in. Does this reflect all revenues that are related to Public Works, including rebate dollars? Rebate from the county?
Well, the main revenue I can think about for the Public Works is the refuge, the tax for commercial tenants that they pay to have trash pickup.
We don't get any rebate dollars from the county?
No, we get road maintenance, tax duplication payment.
And that's what this, that's what's in here? 500,000? No. Okay, I'm just surprised by this. I didn't think that the discrepancy between revenue and expenses for Public Works was so tremendous.
Okay, and then probably highway taxes.
Is that included in the?
That would relate to Public Works because it's.
Is that included in the revenues here, though?
Yes.
Yes. And that only gets us up to this 500,000. Okay. Wow.
It's actually about 840,000.
It's actually a little bit more than that.
Okay.
Yeah, the highway taxes is about 500,000.
Okay.
In and of itself.
Okay. Wow. All right, that's a little lesson.
Not much of a rebate.
The other surprise. Huh?
Welcome to TASB.
Well, yeah, but I don't think that's what TASB came back with either, that there was this huge difference in Public Works, so.
Well, if you think about it, there's also a number of activities in Public Works where any kind of revenue generation is very minimal. Gardens does not generate any money. The Urban Forest Division is only going to be bringing in revenues related to tree protection plans and things of that nature. The City Engineers Division, which is also part of Public Works, is only going to generate minimal permit fees. If the
We don't get rebates for all that?
No.
But the county has an arbor, the county has the city's old arborist, and I know that people in Ward 2 called and asked about the county's tree planting program, and we were told we didn't qualify because we were in the city. But if we're not getting a rebate for that, why don't we get county trees?
There is a portion of the road maintenance tax duplication formula that has a component for trees. So
Okay.
there is a small component of that, which is my suspicion as to why the county is giving that feedback that they're not doing any plantings in Tacoma Park.
Well, maybe it's like the $16 bridge fee that we get, and we should give it back to them and say no thanks. But that's another discussion for another time. So this second question is related to...
In reference to your first question, I wanted to bring out that this is government-wide presentation, and also included in the public works portion is the stormwater fees.
So that includes all the stormwater fees, and it still costs us that much more? You're just making me more scared.
Be scared.
Well, you also had the construction expenditures related to the stormwater fees, too. So,
If it would be helpful, Councilmember Clay, obviously not this evening, but since you have a specific interest in this area, what we'd be happy to do is to provide you a more detailed breakdown of what goes into the cost for public works as well as the revenues that are reflected in this, if that would be helpful.
Okay, but this is accurate revenues and expenses, and it's not, it doesn't look this way because it's the nature of the way this kind of a document is published versus the way the budget is published.
Well, I think what Ms. Brooks is alluding to is that since it's a government-wide depiction, it's going to cross the general fund and also pick up activities from the stormwater management fund.
Okay. Clearly, I need more education on this issue, and I don't want to take up any more of
happy to.
I don't want to take up any more of our auditor's time with this. Thank you.
okay.
So my second question is kind of related to the passport issue, and I can't remember if I brought this up last time you guys were here, but bear with me. My kid had a birthday party here. We had it in the dance room. It was a wonderful party. However, we booked 2 rooms, and the other room that we booked was not available, and it was more expensive, and they moved us to a less expensive room that cost $30 less. We paid by check, so I don't think anyone ran off with the money or anything, but we paid by check. They changed the room, and the process of changing the room did not trigger a refund, even though the resource that I used was less expensive than what I paid for. And I know I asked this question once before in a council meeting, but we didn't really come to an answer with it. But it seems related to the question of, we have people at the front service desk there that are taking money, and there's not a mechanism that accounts for it, so that later somebody says, you know, like when you cash out a drawer, like, where's these dollars, and how come your figure is over for this day for what the booking was, or, you know, or that kind of, or some way, some mechanism to trip that back. Does the correction, well, it couldn't, because the correction that you put in place for this issue relative to the passports doesn't address the numerous other ways in which we capture funds but don't have a mechanism that at the end of whatever the reporting period is, tells us how much money we should have had and a reconciliation of those things. Is that correct?
That is correct, because the passport situation is as someone walking the door, so there's probably no set listing. There's no way, what you're saying, 3 people came in, I should have X number of dollars, and what did you give me? So anyone can walk in during passport time and give their funds and get a passport. So I understand like a reasonableness test. No, so what we were looking for is there some other way in the process that if the individual didn't take certain funds and the funds were remitted to the finance department, that would kind of lessen that gap, as you would say, or the idea that there may be a gap between what came in the door and what actually was received by the finance department.
So it addresses the part of the issue where if someone pays in cash, the cash can disappear. But even the passport one still doesn't address the issue of, do we know everybody paid, and do we have the same number of payments as we have for, nobody's ever checking at the end of the day to show that we have the same number of receipts there as we issued passports.
Actually, yes. One of the process that is done by this one individual, as persons come in to get a passport, she creates a log of everyone that comes in. Now, if someone isn't written log, that's something I guess I can never answer for you, but there's a log. The log is taken, before the process was changed, the log was taken to finance at the end of the day. Finance will say, this is X number of dollars, here's the log, do they agree, and they will process it. So there was something in place and I guess what we're trying to remove is where someone isn't written on a log. So we're trying to minimize that fact there. Whether someone is not written on a log, they're going to still get the passport because this money is separately, it's a separate part, and it's going to be sent to the State Department. So the process we have here is to kind of minimize that one.
But it still doesn't really solve our problem, because, and I want to say that I know that the people who sit at the passport desk, and they're wonderful people, and it's not about that. But let's say you had somebody who was not as scrupulous, and there's no sign on the front of the desk that says you have to pay your money to the finance department.
In any system, in any control, the weakest point is the very first person in the system. We could design a system whereby nobody could get away with anything. It would create probably twice as many jobs as you have here now. It wouldn't be cost effective. Right. So the question you really have to look at is, what's the cost of controlling what it is we're trying to control, and does that cost outweigh the benefit? If the cost outweighs the benefit, then you have to think to yourself, is it really something we want to do? So when we're looking at these things, we're looking at them from a materiality standpoint, but also we're looking at them from a standpoint of, are you doing what is reasonable and what would be prudent to be done? As I said, I could write a management letter, probably write a comment about every area in the city. But, you know, they wouldn't be worth the paper they were written on from a comment standpoint, because it would be so costly to the city to implement them all that the cost would far outweigh the benefits.
So do you think it would cost too much to come up with a system that would address the recreation issue?
Not necessarily. That is something that can be looked at. We could probably come up with something on that.
Would it be too costly to have a setup where everything was paid at the finance office, so that people who worked with the city just know that you don't make payments to line staff, that you always pay the finance office?
That wouldn't be too costly to do. Assuming that you've got the appropriate number of personnel in the finance department to handle the additional workload. But again, that has to be communicated to every citizen that this is the way it's to be done. If you had that unscrupulous employee who told people as they're coming in, don't worry about it, the whole thing breaks down at that point.
If I may, I think one of the things that always comes up, I think, particularly in a governmental setting where you have kind of multiple facilities, is the balance that Mr. Novak was alluding to in terms of making sure you have proper controls, but also customer service issues. For instance, we do have checks being taken at Public Works. When people are filing for special trash pickups or tree protection permits, and do you want those individuals to have to go to Public Works first, basically then come in finance? They would then have to go back to Public Works to show proof of payment. So that's just some of the issues that the council may wish to keep in mind as you give further thought to this issue.
And in that example, all for $10.
In larger organizations, like for instance a county, you'll have this set up whereby the Public Works Department, for the issue of permit, has to have the permit paid for. But the system is set up in such a way that the Public Works Department cannot either accept nor record on the system, on the computerized system, the fact that a payment has been accepted, which forces the individual to go to another department to make the payment. But that's a much larger organization, a much more sophisticated computerized system that's being used to enforce that particular control. When you've got an organization such as yours, a lot of your controls are dependent upon individuals as opposed to computers, because the computerized systems to do these things are much more expensive than what the city has utilized in the past for their systems. Now, those systems are becoming less expensive, but there's still a large cost involved with that. As long as you're relying on individuals as your first line of defense, you're going to have weaknesses, and there's no other way around that.
Okay. Josh, and then Dan, and then I'm going to go last, and for those of you who haven't been around for these, I always have questions, and I do this year, and given the amount of time we've put on this so far, I will try and make my list go as quickly as possible, but just know that I'm coming behind you.
I'll make my questions and comments brief. I would also just say that I think if we implemented or dealt with Colleen's other pet peeve around being able to pay for things with credit cards, then a lot of those control issues would solve themselves and go away, because residents would know they would come in and pay with credit cards. The majority of them would, and there'd be very little cash or checks to deal with, and would be well worth the small amount we have to pay in merchants or transmission fees to the credit card companies. I would echo Terry's comment about the timeliness in which we received this information. As a new council member, it was particularly frustrating to receive it on such short notice. I don't think there was any intentional, I don't think that was done intentionally in a negative way. I just think that was sort of how it happened, but I would next year like to see it happen much more early. The second comment I would say is I think it would be helpful if we're changing, as you said, there's going to be significant changes to how the audits perform, and it's going to go to a more risk-based model. I think it would be very helpful to present that to the council and let the public also understand that process, and then give the council, if it has to be in closed session, some opportunity to comment on areas that they think should be focused on and factor that into the risk. I have one specific question related to the police, or two actually, the police evidence. The first is on the management, lack of monitoring of seized property. You note that periodic internal audits will be conducted by someone who does not have access to the evidence room and the related inventory records. Could you just help me understand what periodic means, like how, because we could come back next year, and periodic could have meant 18 months or 2 years, or does it mean 3 months or 6 months?
Periodic generally means in periods less than a year. The reason why we use periodic is we don't like to we don't like to tell anybody you have to do it monthly, you have to do it quarterly, you have to do it semi-annually. So the term periodic is used to reflect a period of time less than a year. But that's something that's to be determined.
I believe the policy was to do it on a quarterly basis, according to the procedures, and it just wasn't being done on a quarterly basis.
Okay. And my second question is, do you think it would be worthwhile when you come back and audit next year to just check in this area to make sure that, because they're also in the cash management system, there was a procedure in place, it just wasn't happening. But just to check to make sure, do you think that would make sense?
Well, anytime we write a management letter comment, the following year, one of the first things we do is follow up to determine that it has been resolved totally to our satisfaction. Because if it hasn't been, then that becomes a new area of concern the following year. Not the area itself, but the fact that what was said that was going to be done hasn't been done, and the follow-through hasn't been incurred. That's a whole other set of problems and a whole other set of issues. So that's one of the very first things that we do when we come in to do the audit.
Great, thank you, and thank you to the Finance Department. I have experienced audits on the for-profit business side before, and to get such short management letters with so few questions is a big tribute to the Finance Department, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Novak and others. The whole thing, Colleen, about where's the money coming in and your comments, I mean, that in the retail world, it's called point of sale, and that is always a tough thing, but we can do that. Shouldn't be that tough. The risk-based model, I'm curious to know what that is, so next year I'll look forward to understanding that completely before we get this document.
I'd be more than happy to come and address the council to explain how this is all going to work.
I'd appreciate that.
the easiest way to think about it, and, you know, it's putting it in very simplistic terms, but inherently, we all know how to start a car. What if you had to write a book on how to start a car and had to write down every procedure and analyze every procedure in starting that car? That's really the difference between the approaches. The one approach is an inherent, innate, you know what it is, and you just basically go ahead and do it. The other approach is sitting down and analyzing every step along the way and determining which steps are the most critical in the entire process, and what are we doing to make sure that they're being done properly.
That sounds fraught with peril. Just creating that document and then attempting to follow it. I hope that we don't spin our wheels spending too much time making a million steps where that's not really appropriate.
Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of control over that because this is a standard that's been foisted upon us by the standard setters in our industry. So it's not something that we dreamed up on our own and decided to go forward with. It's something that's industry-wide.
Are your fees going to increase dramatically as well?
Our fees had already factored that in when we put our proposal together last year. So that's already been factored in.
Okay.
And it's a multi-year.
It's a multi-year.
Colleen, the TASD, we should have the TASD document next to this document so that next year we see, oh, gee, it was only $250,000 rebate from the county that came to Public Works. That's my recollection of the TASD document. But next year, after all the good works that we're doing this year, I'm sure it will be at least $500,000 from the county.
Well, but when I look at the document, I see some of the difference is that I think of Public Works as picking up the trash and repairing the roads, and building maintenance is included in this at
we can't go back and review TASD now, but that's a good task for us all to do, to be as aware of that as possible. That's not your business, I know.
And we don't have to wait for next year. We can do that anytime.
We can do that now, yeah. And the real question I had is on page 11, and it's under the overview of financial statements portion. And you say that under government-wide financial statements, all city operations are categorized and recorded as either governmental or business-type activities. And then you list governmental activities such as police, public works, rec, community development, and general government administration. You don't say what business-type activities are, and then you go on to say that there are none. And now here we are talking about point of sale and how much money's coming in the door and all this stuff. So for I'm curious about what business-type activities are. I know that the city manager's getting ready to that there are other ways you can clarify what that means in other places. So to get something from the both of you about that.
Yeah, this is actually a statement from it's management's discussion and analysis, so it's not the auditors. But typically, business-type activities, having worked in cities that have those, are going to be enterprise funds. If we had an electric utility in one city that I worked in, we had a water utility, we had a sewer utility. So it would be those type of activities where the actual type of accounting is much more of a business model. How did I do explaining that?
Governmental activities are basically activities that only a government can do, and the goal is not to make money or to necessarily break even, but rather to provide service. Business-type activities are activities that are done by a government, but the motive is to break even, to operate much like a business, so that it doesn't cost the citizens who aren't using the service any additional funds. Best example is the water and sewer fund. If you live in a rural jurisdiction like I do, the people that are on well water shouldn't be required to pay for the water distribution system for the people who are hooked up to it. And therefore, the rates need to be set in such a way so that the individuals who are hooked up are paying for the system.
In your opinion, are there any activities that we could be doing that you don't see in that regard?
That's something really outside the purview of the audit.
Okay, and let me, how about, I know I'm fishing here a little bit, but contracting to others, other entities outside the government. Is that something that would be, that sounds like from what you said, it would be a governmental, even though it would be a contractual arrangement. Is that fair to say?
Again, it depends upon the type of arrangement and what your motivation was and what your goal was.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'll do my list. Just about all of mine are key to page numbers. First, let me say that I found this report this year a lot easier to read and understand and follow. I didn't come up with my last year's report, but I went back to 1993, 1998, and 2003, and compared them just briefly to see, what was in them and how easy it was to look at. And I'm assuming a lot of this new format comes from a different finance director, from maybe some GASB requirements.
GASB.
But whatever caused it, it made it a lot easier to look at it and understand some of the interrelationships of what's going on. So I guess maybe we can thank GASB for that, but not maybe for what's coming now. Or do we only get to make negative comments about GASB?
Only negative.
Okay.
Actually, GASB's been pretty quiet. There's really nothing coming down the pike that's going to have a major impact on the city. So you're actually in pretty good shape from that standpoint.
All right, good. Now, and some of these may just be comments, and some of them may be questions, and some of them may be questions that you just kind of say, well, I can't answer that now. My first question is on page 11, where it talks about lease proceeds of $525,000, and I was just wondering what lease proceeds are.
Okay, we acquired 15 police patrol cars.
Right.
And the way it's treated accounting-wise is that even though we're only making a payment of $118,000 in fiscal year 2007, we actually acquired equipment worth $525,000. And technically received a loan for that, because this is a capital lease, although we didn't actually receive the money. The money went directly to pay for the car.
We essentially received the vehicles, and we have to account for that amount.
So you actually received about $525,000 worth of police vehicles, and we also entered into debt to the extent of $525,000,
right,
of which we made one payment in fiscal year 2007 of $118,000. And we have to make 4 additional payments annually to completely pay off that debt.
Gotcha. Page 19, if I can just point out to folks that in the third paragraph there, it points up that we do have funds for acquisition of cable equipment of $367,000, just to remember that we get those monies from the cable agreement, and that they're needed for multi-year purchases, but that they are there and available for maybe something to consider as we go forward with the auditorium renovation, that is a source of money that we have available. Again, on page 19, down at the bottom, the last paragraph, where it talks about expenditures in most categories were less than anticipated, particularly in general government, which accounted for $762,000 of expenditure savings, primarily attributable to lower than anticipated costs for contingencies, emergency supplies, and other administrative costs. Can you say anything about that?
Ms. Brooks can correct me if I misspeak. For the more tenured council members, you may recall that in prior financial reports, there was actually a separate delineation for what we call non-departmental. This year, for reasons I don't entirely understand, Ms. Brooks, so the auditors may want to explain this, the non-departmental was actually rolled into general government, so most of those savings were related to the unappropriated reserve or the general contingency account monies not being expended. That was a large portion of it anyway.
That explains it. Thanks. Page 21, you got a typo. First line talks about the decrease for 38%. That should be 3.8%. You missed a period. Otherwise, we'd be have a much larger reduction in our outstanding debt. And if I can just point out for people who might not recognize them in the long-term liabilities listing under that, that first item, the microloan, I think is for 6 Grant Avenue. Is that the remaining piece on that? And the loan payable, the second item is for the infrastructure improvements in the annexation area. And the third item is the purchase of Tacoma Junction. And I know later there's something on page 46 that has more detail on that, but it might be helpful as we go forward if the staff could provide some comprehensive figure for the Tacoma Junction loan as we get to maybe considering doing something with that over the next term, that it's not only the purchase but the money's expended for the loan, so that we kind of know basically what will have been put out of pocket on that loan, because it was rolled over and refinanced, and just to have a sense of what all we put into that. Page 22. This projecting forward for how it affects the current year budget is very helpful. So I was glad to see that section. Page 27. I'm assuming that just is there because of the new way of explaining things in Gatsby.
This page has been there for a number of years. Basically, this page is trying to explain how you get from one accounting method to another accounting method. It's basically a working paper, if you will, or a reconciliation.
Right, a key to the map.
Right. I don't know whether I want to get into 30 and 31, looking at the fund balance end of year variance and trying to relate that to pages 70 and 71. I guess maybe I'll just point out that it seems like 71 is the page to look at if anybody's trying to figure it out. And maybe if I can just, I don't want to take up the time now, but just to maybe if there's a simple way to explain the net change in fund balance at the bottom of page 71, how that affects things going forward, whether that relates to another page or not when you get to kind of the cumulative effect, or whether you don't want to look at the cumulative effect of it because it doesn't really tell you anything. And I'm not sure there's a clear question in there, but I'm just looking for to make sure that we understand the net change in the fund balance going forward, how it affects whatever we're doing as we go forward. When I see this historical table, I wasn't sure.
But that table pertains to governmental funds, all of them combined.
Right.
Versus the general fund.
Right, it's more than the general fund, it's all the funds.
Page 70 has all of the funds on it as well. It just so happens that it has the general fund broken out in one category at the top, but at the bottom, that's 686,137 in the 2007 column, is the total of the stormwater management and the non-major funds as reported on page 28. So page 70 and page 28 do tie together, although there isn't a total number on page 28 that you can see on page 27, or on page 70. All the amounts or all the totals are accounted for on page 70.
Yeah, I'm sure they're accounted for. I just want to get a sense, and like I say, I don't need to spend more time on it tonight, but if there's another way to look at that to understand kind of how the historical movement of the total fund balance change, so to know where we are now versus where we were at some point in the past, because you see where there's a whole bunch of positives moving forward, and then all of a sudden you get into negatives, and now we're back up to the bigger positive again. But just kind of, is this the best place to look at understanding the end of year situation every year?
Yes, I mean, I think it's going to show you the most complete picture. I think once you start looking, if you look at kind of the second part of the graph, for instance, with the special revenue fund, some of that may have to do with the timing of when expenditures are made and when we might get reimbursement from the state or federal government or other grantor. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. I think probably the best indication of maybe the city's fiscal health is to look at the general fund and to look at reserved and unreserved, because some of that has to do with unrestricted cash and money that is available to meet the city's daily needs. As Mr. Novak commented, part of what you need to keep in mind is, you know, what part of your assets are also tied up in capital. So I think when you look at the unreserved portion of the general fund, that will give you a kind of a better indication of what's available in part to be expended. If we can try to break some of these numbers down, Mayor Williams, if that would be helpful in terms, since some of these are reserved. If you'd like a more detailed breakdown, particularly related to the general fund, Ms. Brooks and I can get together and try to put something together for you.
Yeah, one other thing to keep in mind is being that these are governmental funds and loans are considered a revenue source, if you will, the timing of when that revenue source comes in versus when you actually spend the money on what it is you're spending the money on can create some very large fluctuations from year to year. And so when you're looking at this information, it's good information to have if you look at it from a line-to-line basis, not necessarily an in-total basis, because when you take the lines, you know, individually, there may be some nuances in there that aren't readily determinable by looking at the bottom line.
Right, because like you say about the timing issues.
Right.
Okay. Page 43, the due from other governments, and one of the items is the State of Maryland Income Tax Reserve. Can you just make 2 sentences on what that reserve is?
Oh, yeah. We had this discussion last year. Apparently, income tax, they hold back revenue because the settlement of each calendar year for the taxes is not completed right away. They have to resolve the estimated taxes and what the person actually owes at the end of the year to determine the actual revenues that's due to the state and the local jurisdictions.
Just seems like an awful big figure.
It is.
It represents more than 1 year's holdback because it's a constantly moving target, and the state has a formula for determining how much is held back each year. And then I believe it's within an 18-month period of time, everything gets resolved and gets trued up. But by that point in time, more funds have also.
It gets resolved, but it always leaves them holding our money. Yeah.
These numbers get even larger when you get into larger jurisdictions such as counties. They get to be very large.
Now I remember the discussion.
This was one of the things that GASB did that was actually kind of interesting because prior to GASB 33, I think it was, this information wasn't reported on governments. When Gatsby put out a new pronouncement, it required this information to be reported. The year that it had to be reported, it opened up a lot of eyes, and there was a lot of discussion that occurred both at the state level and also at the county levels.
I'm getting close. 73? Which is the better column to look at to understand delinquent taxes? The delinquent tax collections and credits column or the outstanding delinquent taxes column? Which gives a truer picture of where we are on collecting delinquent taxes?
Got you all.
The outstanding
Yeah,
the outstanding delinquent is probably the better of the two, because that is your more or less your cumulative to date.
And that's a cumulative figure, not a per year figure.
As I recall.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Then I won't worry about that one. If it was the other column, then I'd be worried. Page 74, you've got a stranded note, number 4. You can strike that one from the report. That year is gone.
What page is it?
Page 74. Note 4 at the bottom.
Fell off the table.
Yep, it's gone from the table. 97 is gone.
Oh.
Page 75. Would it be reasonable to say that when you look at the trend for the Tacoma Park tax rate versus the Montgomery County tax rate, starting with 2002 forward to 2007, where our rate pretty much stayed the same, the county's rate came way down, so that for the first time in 2007, our tax rate is actually a couple mils higher than the county rate, whereas in 2002, theirs was 21 cents higher than ours. Would it be fair to say that the reason for that trend is that they have a whole lot more and different types of properties whose assessment gets them more money, like a lot more commercial, a lot wider variety of residential stuff, and ours is fairly fixed, and we're pretty much reliant on this, on the property tax, and they have other things that contribute that they don't have to be as reliant on the property tax? Or is there some other explanation that anybody could come up with?
Well, I'm not that familiar with how Montgomery County sets its tax rates, but certainly I think it would be fair to say, Mayor Williams, that counties certainly have much more flexibility in terms of how they raise revenues compared to municipalities in Maryland.
Because just looking at it, it's troublesome, but then when I start thinking about the reasons for it, I can come up with plenty of reasons, but...
Yeah, there was certainly a big change between fiscal 2001 and 2002 in terms of the county's tax rate.
Well, everybody changed from the 40% assessment to the 100% assessment. So that's why I was starting with 2002.
Under that logic, the state of Maryland their rate should have been coming down as well, but that actually increased and has held steady since then. So I think you really have to take a look at the government as a whole, and not only how they're financing what they're doing, but what it is they're actually doing. Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? Are they holding pat? There are just too many factors that go into it, into a discussion of tax rates than just the mix of properties and the type of properties that you have to use.
Okay, and then just one final comment, and all it is an observation that on page 82, where we have the FTE history for the last 10 years, I would note that when you compare 1998 and 10 years later, 2007, that the full-time equivalent total for the city is actually half a position less than it was 10 years ago, which I think shows that we managed to deal with a changing needs and expectations within the same number of people, and I think that's a pretty good thing, and I hope we can continue that trend. And that's the end of my questions. And comments. And it's 9:30. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll arrange to have you come back at an appropriate time to talk to us a little bit about the changed format, and also if we need the opportunity to talk with you about any areas of concern for the next audit.
Very good. Look forward to it.
And we'll take a short break and come back to the remaining items on the agenda. And if any of my colleagues want to look at any of these previous ones. Oh, I have more. Here with mine. Next item on the agenda is a resolution declaring the first week of December as Think Tacoma Shop Local, and I'll add Lee, Week in Tacoma Park. And we have Roz Grigsby and David Potts-Dupre. I knew David, but I couldn't think of your last name. Here to talk about this.
So I'm Executive Director of the Old Tacoma Business Association, and David is Chair of the Promotions Committee of Main Street Tacoma. And we bring this before you tonight for your consideration, and we hope your support. And I was going to turn it over to David to give you some of the background.
Just a couple short comments. Roz has a little, you all like this, and that explains a lot of the reasons for a buy local campaign, particularly for Tacoma Park. And I don't think we need to go into the details there, although we'd be happy to answer questions. Couple things. I note that the resolution is more than just a week. I mean, that's how we're asking for a declaration of a week to be declared, but this is a much longer-term goal, is to try to get people in the Tacoma Park area to think about supporting their local businesses and shops. So we're asking for a support for a campaign that's broader than just this 1 week. And I was even just mentioning to Councilmember Robinson that we're even asking that you all declare your intention to live by this, and to the extent possible buy in Tacoma Park, because that's the goal here, is to get individuals to recognize the need for this. I was Saturday shopping in Tacoma Park and talking with one of the business owners and of a great shop in Tacoma Park, and he was explaining to me that he feels discouraged by the fact that more residents don't support his shop. And they get people coming in from the outside, but Tacoma Park's not a destination city at this point particularly, and he doesn't feel the residents are supporting it the way he had hoped they would, and he's somewhat discouraged. And I'm concerned that that's going to cause him to leave at some point, and that scares me if that's the way a lot of our businesses are perceiving this, and I think they are perceiving it. I don't have a business downtown, but I'm a board member of the OTBA, and I certainly talk to a lot of the business owners, and I think that is a concern, that they don't feel local residents are coming downtown and supporting the stores as much as they hoped, as much as they should. And I think it is up to each of us to do our part in that. If our downtown were filled with Walmarts and Costco's, I'd have no interest in going down and supporting those kind of businesses. But the kind of businesses we have here in Tacoma Park are locally owned and operated businesses, and they employ people in the area, and I think those are people I want to support. Those are people I want to attract into Tacoma Park and retain if they're here. And I think the residents of Tacoma Park and Tacoma, D.C. are very politically active and involved people. And I think if they understood that the business community is struggling in certain ways and is not getting the support they need, then I think people would begin to recognize that they've got to do what they can to keep Tacoma Park a vibrant community. And this resolution is sort of the first step in that. Let's start getting people downtown. Let's start a campaign of getting people to come and shop downtown. For my own part, I talked with my wife, and we pledged to buy all our Christmas presents in Tacoma Park this year. And so that's sort of the background and why we think it's necessary to do this.
I just want to add that this is part of a broader effort that OTBA is undertaking. We showed the film Independent America here in the council chambers a couple of weeks ago, which raises a lot of the issues of why it matters. We're doing articles in The Voice. We're kind of generally trying to get people thinking and talking about what it is that makes a community and what locally owned, independently operated businesses contribute to that piece of what makes some place a hometown. And I think, it's a combination of informing people and educating people and getting them out into local stores to actually see for themselves. I think a number of residents have impressions of various parts of the town, the business sectors in Tacoma Park, which may or may not be backed up by actually walking in the door and seeing for themselves. And business owners tell me they regularly experience customers coming in saying, wow, I had no idea you had this kind of merchandise. And there are businesses in Tacoma Park that draw from outside of the city, that draw people into the area. And even those, a lot of local folks don't know about. So I feel like it's kind of a step in the process of saying, check it out, see what's here. And there are many other pieces of this that we're hoping to launch. We've been working with The Voice on doing an article for December about fair trade and environmentally friendly kinds of products and things that fit into the political activism of the community. But we need to kind of get the conversation going, get people thinking about how they spend their individual dollars in the same way they think about how they vote, or the kind of impact that their own personal choices make in the world around them, including right in their hometown.
Yeah, and it's become particularly important in some ways because Silver Spring has become more attractive now. And a lot of people are going into Silver Spring, and it's hurting some of our local businesses. So,
be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I think this is a wonderful first step, and this is something that really needs to be encouraged. And as you say, if it's an education for people to understand some of what's available, and we can spread the word as we talk to a lot of individuals and neighborhood associations and whatever events we go to try and make it happen. If I can just make my plea for making whatever we pass say locally rather than local, just because I think it's actually grammatically correct, because it's an adverb modifying that verb of shop, and maybe ask for somebody to introduce it and move it.
Second.
With my amendment to make it locally?
Definitely.
Is that friendly? Good.
Okay.
Does that take it out of phase with anything else?
Buy local is sort of it's a nationwide campaign. There's a thing called Buy Local, so that's sort of a.
They're going to have to change theirs.
That's right. We can differ from that.
Okay, good. Any comments, Josh?
A question. One would be, I would wonder if we might want to make this an annual. One thing would be to make an amendment now to make it the first week in December every year, or maybe you want to come back every year, and you might adjust it a little bit based on when Thanksgiving falls and the holiday shopping season falls. But
yes and yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think so. Yeah.
I would say I also will commit to buying my Christmas presents locally in Tacoma Park.
Great.
And I'm very supportive of this. I think that I hope this is the first step, and we do in future years we have an even more aggressive campaign and think about other ways to draw people in to shop locally around the holiday season. So.
Thank you.
Terry?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we don't need to modify this to say think Tacoma-ly. Last year you had I think a successful, you kind of successfully leveraged some mileage off of the holiday event that the church had. Do you have any other plans besides this for the holiday season?
We do. The holiday open house is this coming weekend, and we will have some music events going on at the gazebo Saturday and Sunday. As part of that, the following week, December 9th, is Pajama-rama, which I know some council members are very committed to. And
that's where people show up in their pajamas and shop deals.
From 7 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Deals in the
store.
Barb's going to be there, I know.
I've been told no pajamas, no discounts. And the following week from that, December 15th, we're partnering with the Arts and Humanities Commission for the Open Studio Tour. And there'll be businesses displaying art, and some of the businesses downtown will open their studios. The Kittners will be open, and John Hume will be demonstrating his tile making in front of American Craft and some of that kind of thing.
And have we installed the holiday decorations in Old Town?
Not yet.
Barb, is that something that we can do soon?
I know the Public Works Director had touched base with me probably a couple weeks ago about installing holiday decorations. I'm not sure what her schedule is, but I can check with her tomorrow. I know it's on their work plan.
It's after Thanksgiving, and I think it's imperative that we get those up because I think they do help with attracting attention to the commercial districts.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to support this and look forward to other ideas as you bring them forward. Thank you.
Doug?
Yes, this is a great idea, a great initiative, and Ilana called me this afternoon and wanted to comment for the newsletter about this project, so I was glad to hear that that's going to be featured, and she said, do you buy any gifts in the Crossroads area? And I had to think for a minute. I do a lot of shopping there, and I thought, well, yeah, sometimes I go to this Indian grocery store there, and I buy, a number of different kinds of lentils. They have 9 different kinds. And she kind of had this amazed sound in her voice, and I thought, well, maybe that's why I don't get invited any place anymore. But I did speak to Erwin Mack this morning. He's fully supportive of this and said that if there's anything that they can do over on that side of town to support what you're doing, he'd be happy to do it.
We did deliberately make this as broad as we could. Obviously, I represent the Old Town part of Old Tacoma, but we felt like the whole town can benefit from the visibility that council action on this can give us.
Thanks for doing it.
And the Main Street is a cross-jurisdictional out group, so.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, Bruce, I'll say a couple things too. Congratulations on pulling this together and bringing it before us. I'm fully supportive. I've got a kind of a nerdy economist take on things in general, and I know that there's this concept of leakages. If we draw a circle around Tacoma Park and try to keep as much money inside and let us have as little as possible have money go outside, that's good for us. Maybe there can be some kind of quid pro quo that you can help determine how much is being captured from people in Tacoma Park. Maybe that's too big a task, but if the merchants can somehow get a sense of how they're doing with attracting people to shop locally, either a survey, a little survey, or something like that, that might help us know that this is a success next year or even sooner. We have a $20 million budget in the city. How much of that can go local? How much of that money can stay locally? I'm not saying that every dollar needs to be spent here in town, but I think it's something for us to think about. We have some specific things that I'm going to challenge all of us to do in the next couple of years. One is how to deal with the city lot in the junction, because that is a huge asset that's underused for that area, which is part of the old Tacoma Business Association's purview, and we've got to work hard to make that work for the businesses in the junction. The biggest problem in the junction and in a lot of places is how do people get through park and planning? Others have called park and planning parking and planning, and in that regard, this time I think they're right. They control what businesses can come into our city, and that's crucial. And without having adequate parking, we'll never get anywhere in the junction or in Old Town. So I can't wait to dig in on this kind of thing, and I fully support where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any public comments? All right. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
The next item is a resolution of support for Victory Tower Senior Association grant application. Suzanne.
Hi. The members of the officers of Victory Tower were here earlier this evening, some of them, and weren't able to stay this late, but I said I'd happily introduce the item. The Tower Senior Association is a nonprofit organization, and they are interested in promoting wellness in the community for seniors within their building and surrounding area. They have applied for a Montgomery County Community Service grant, and what they would like this grant to be used for is to transform a small room in their building that they call a wellness room into one that can be used for examinations and kind of more medical uses by the nursing department of Columbia Union College, which will start coming to provide services to them very shortly. The equipment that the Senior Association desires includes an examining table, scales, a computer, some way to receive some of the information, a fax machine or similar. They wanted the support of members of the council, and so we put forward a draft resolution supporting their application for this grant. One of the things that I think is nice about it is that it doesn't just support the residents of Victory Tower, but it is something that would support seniors in the community.
I would
a
like
copy
to
of
move that.
resolution 2.
Do I hear a second? Second. Okay, any comments? Josh?
I would just say briefly that, having gone to some of the Tower Residents Association meetings, I think this is great. Again, they are entrepreneurial, industrious in providing new programs for the residents of the Tower, and fully and wholeheartedly support this.
Any other comments? Any public comments? All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Approved unanimously. And the last item on our regular meeting agenda is a resolution providing for appointment to the Montgomery College Neighborhood Advisory Committee. If we had other things, this would normally be on a consent agenda. Does anybody want to make any comments? Somebody want to move it? Second?
Second.
Any further comments? Any public comments? All those who approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any negatives or abstentions? Approves unanimously. The last item on our agenda is a work session item on Tacoma Metro update. And should I observe that the presenters are Sue, and does that make any comment on any actions that we might take?
Oh, what a lead-in. I hope they're watching.
Sue R.
So,
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to just make a brief description of where we are? I think most people in the community know that on November 8th, there was a vote by the WMATA board to approve the EYA plan, which would develop our metro stop where we all stop locally with the LY. And that's sort of not the end of the struggle. Obviously, it's the end of that phase of the work that this council has been very involved in and our community has been very dedicated to. The next phase, I wanted to just describe at least the legal choices to yourselves and to the community. Briefly, after that happens, there are two different types of approvals that are necessary for the development to go forward. And in both cases, the city can choose to be actively involved. The first is the approval in front of the Federal Transit Administration, which, because this was originally taken by the federal government for the transit function, if it's now going to be sold as part of this development to a private interest, FTA has to approve the transfer of the land. And there is federal regulation, federal statute that describes what is the standard that FTA has to apply for this approval. And the city could certainly be involved. It'll be a paper process. The WMATA has to submit a new application for this UAA plan, and it has not yet done that, but we expect that will be probably happening fairly soon, and the city would be able to comment on that submission. There's no actual hearing,
or any kind of oral argument. It's just a paper type of application process and comment process. The second procedure, and by the way, we don't know which of these will happen first. WMATA has told us that it intends to do the FTA process first, but there's some reason to believe that some of the additional refinement of the proposal that would happen in the DC planning process may have to occur before FTA is willing to approve this process. So the second administrative kind of process is called the PUD process, Plan Unit Development, because townhouses are being proposed for the metro site. And it involves first the Office of Planning better reviewing and articulating and clarifying the site, and then there'll be some formal hearings in front of the commission, the zoning commission in the District of Columbia. The city doesn't have the ability to automatically be a party in this process. We can certainly lobby it, and we can petition to become a party. And so that's another place where the city could be very active in trying to have some input on what actually will become the ultimate plan that goes forward. There's, of course, much continuing lobbying that's going to occur. As per the mayor's joke, there's certainly court options that the city is considering and has in its as a possibility. I guess that's kind of the overview. It's certainly my advice that besides this meeting, where almost nobody's left in the audience except maybe those who are watching by television, there could be more of a public process to prioritize what kinds of goals the city continues to want to bring to this next set of procedures, and what kind of results the community can itself agree upon to going forward.
Did you have anything to add, Susan? And if I can just add one additional item, which is that I've been invited to attend, and Councilmember Wright is going to accompany me to a meeting tomorrow to meet with various officials. The meeting has been called by the State Secretary of Transportation, and it'll be a chance to meet with some folks from the district and from the county, and get a little bit better sense maybe of where the process is going next, and see what we find out there as well. Anybody have any questions, observations? Josh?
I just have a question about what's your sense of what the criteria is for us if we do ask to be a party to the PUD process? Is it very arbitrary, or is there?
No, there's definitely factors and criteria, but we definitely don't have a right. It'll be discretionary with the commission.
Sir, thank you. I would personally like to see us hold a public forum, kind of a facilitated forum that would help us to discuss the various options, and as Ms. Silver said, prioritize the various things of what we want to happen and how we want to get there.
And one of the things that I observed as throughout the fall campaign was that I wanted to find opportunities to have discussions on some topics that didn't necessarily have to be part of a Monday night council meeting, and I'm wondering whether this might be one of those times where we say, well, there might be a better way to do it. We don't have to necessarily try and shoehorn it into an agenda, but to say with some public notice that this is something that we would like to do, and have an opportunity for feedback from the public, and put out more information as we know it. Does that sound like something that would be a good first one to set up something?
Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think
and soon.
Yes. So,
Enough public notice so people will be here, but soon
Yes.
enough so that we can get input into the, and help us determine how we want to act in those processes.
okay. Should we try and set it up for a weekday evening for some period of time, like hour and a half, whatever it might be, or try and set it up for a weekend, or anybody have any thoughts? If you can get back to me on that. We're meeting on agenda items tomorrow, and we could try and come up with some, maybe 2 or 3 options, and put those out to people and see what works, and try and get that scheduled ASAP.
And I would also like us to find someone who is skilled at facilitating a meeting like that.
Okay. Dan?
So from what I understand, the Federal Transit Authority is the first, or is an element, and that's a paper kind of process of some sort. It's an application and a review without public comment or without public input or input from us. Did I hear that correctly?
No, I think there will be input from us, it's just it won't be in the form of a hearing or more of a contested case.
Okay.
It'll be in the form of written comments.
Okay. And the PUD, or that's a site plan process, do I have that right?
It is a site plan process, and it has both stages that are more in the nature of planning, where we can certainly try to have input staff to staff as well as lobbying. And then later it goes into an actual hearing process.
A
public hearing.
I went through a site plan review and a preliminary plan review process not too long ago, and the negotiating that took place was between the developer and staff, or in that case it was between me and Park and Planning staff. And the hearing was a presentation of what went on during that negotiation, and it was really kind of a sign-off by the board, the commission, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. Is that a similar process in this?
I expect it will be similar, although it is the DC government rather than
Right,
Park and Planning.
of course. And in that process, the city of Tacoma Park had a seat at the table, in essence, during that negotiation phase. So is that the part that is it a similar process in that regard as well?
No, that's where it's different.
Okay.
Because the entire metro station parcel of land is in the District of Columbia, none of it is in Maryland, even though we all know we all use it.
Yes.
Because it's in there, the city will not have any role as part of the commission or the governing body or the decision makers. Our role will be more lobbying those decision makers or asking to be a party before that commission.
Okay. I think that's a good distinction to make, particularly in the public in the time when we have the public involved, so that that's clear. It's a little bit arcane. It seemed to me at the time when I went through it a little bit arcane. Now I understand it better. This is a little different in that it's not in our jurisdiction, but I still think it would be important for the public to fully understand that process.
It's a lead into something I'd like to get back to, if I could, for a minute about the public session. I would wonder, and I actually would advise, that DC community members be invited. And what's especially interesting is the ANC will have a role as parties in the whole DC process. And so their ability to shape this is going to be greater than ours, and our ability to collaborate with them will be a big part of our ability to be effective.
Good point. I have a question that maybe the city attorney and the city manager could put their heads together on and get back to us with some information. I think it would be helpful to know what the legal expenditures have been on this process and how that affects our legal budget for the year, and whether there might be a recommendation for a possible amount to set aside to add to the legal budget, some action that the council might want to take to see where we are on this and consider as we go forward what we might need to have available for any legal options.
Yeah, I can provide some of that information this evening, Councilmember Williams. To date, through the end of October, just on the Metro issue, the city has spent just under $84,000. That does cross fiscal year, so I should note that.
That's a calendar year total?
It's basically a kind of lifetime total, if you will, in terms of legal fees, because obviously this issue has been going on for some time, and the city attorney's office has been involved. I mean, just if you want to break down, in 2005, we spent about $10,600 roughly. 2006, just under $39,000.
That's cumulative.
No, that's an additional $39,000. And to date, in 2007, we've spent just about $34,000.
And those are fiscal years or calendar?
Those are calendar years. It's the way the city attorney's office keeps their books.
Okay.
In terms of kind of where we're at with the legal budget for this year, we have basically received bills from the city attorney's office through the end of October, and those bills total just about $81,000. We have a legal budget of about $170,000, but we've expended just in the first 4 months about 48% of the legal budget. It's kind of hard to predict where we're going, but I think there's a halfway decent chance that we will exceed the appropriation this fiscal year. So probably some budget amendment may be needed. But Ms. Silver and I can certainly talk about the other issue that you raised, Mayor Williams.
Right. So that I guess the other part of that is to, I know that as we go through the year, there's generally been the case to hold off considering appropriating from the unappropriated reserves until we get well into the fiscal year, and that generally tends to be, okay, once we get halfway through and get to December 31, where are we and what might we want to consider doing with some of those unappropriated reserves, and so a sense of where, what if anything we've done with the unappropriated reserves, and any recommendations for where we might want to go, need to go in assigning some of those for potential legal expenses.
In addition to the legal expenses, just a reminder, there's also been the consultant's work for Nelson Nygaard, which I think the city manager also has some.
Right. We've spent to date about $22,000 with Nelson Nygaard.
And we had passed a budget amendment.
Yes, I think the amount of the 20,000 that was recently kind of the maximum, I think we spent about 13,000 of that. The previous was previously allocated for the report work and other investigations that they've done over a year ago.
Right, right. So just a comprehensive picture of what we've spent, where we are, and
And that's not my time.
Pardon?
My time's not counted.
These are hard dollars.
Yes. It might, to the extent that you can provide a guesstimate of some figure, some percentage of your time, some, whatever's an easy.
I try to blink it out.
I can guess that Suzanne's been as active as I've been. So it depends what rate you.
Just some easy way of saying, well, it also has.
Obviously, I mean, in this past year, there have probably been 2-week time periods where all I did was Tacoma Metro stuff.
Well, and I would note that a lot of Ms. Ludlow's work was not done during work time, and obviously as an exempt employee, the actual hard cost to the city is her salary for 40 hours a week, but obviously for any hours she puts in above that, there is no cost to the city per se. So
only a cost to Suzanne.
Correct. No, I do. I mean, I will see if there's some kind of guesstimate I can do. Off the top of my head, I don't know that right now. But
all I'm asking for is, maybe 10 minutes to think about it and come up with some way of capturing that.
Like a quarter.
Well, I mean, I think as Barb mentions, I mean, it's awfully hard to say a percentage of my time because my time is way over a 40-hour week. And so, but I think that, you know, my guess is that this year I probably spent a quarter or a third of my time somehow related to Tacoma Metro. We've done an awful lot of work. I think it's been helpful work, and so I feel good about it, but it is a substantial amount.
And on that note of hopefulness, I know that a lot of people in town, and a lot of us, are deflated and disheartened by the decision of the WMATA board to go ahead with the development there, almost as if it's a fait accompli. However, it would be a mistake for us to conclude that there haven't been some significant contributions that the city has made in assuring that people pay attention to the transit first and transit access priorities. And I think that certainly we have gained a lot of attention and focus to those issues. And would it be going too far out on a limb to say, as we continue to repeat those themes in the fora that you have laid out for us, that there's more than just a glimmer of hope, that we might expect that there would be some additional improvements that we might see in the existing plan?
I think there absolutely, I believe that there is quite a lot of hope. Not saying it will happen, but there's a lot of potential. The work that we have done and the hiring of a consultant, you know, with a national reputation in transit design, the documentation that we've provided, when somebody pays attention to it, they are very persuaded because it's well documented. It's based on standards for the width of sidewalks and bicycle paths and those kinds of things that are facts. And I think as it goes through the process where planners who refer to those standards on a regular basis see them replicated in the materials that we've prepared, it would be very hard not to go along with many of those points. I think also there is also a strong issue about an interest in promoting mass transit, promoting bus access to a station, promoting bicycle and walking to transit. And we are a heavy transit user. From your neighborhood and from the neighborhoods across the city, many people use the Tacoma Metro. It's not a little local thing. It is a community resource that's heavily used. And I think as those facts come through, whether it's lobbying, whether it's talking at a planner-to-planner level, or whether it's in the kind of closed, the standard process through the zoning commission, those facts, if well presented, I think have a good chance of being heard. There's lots of work to be done, but the documentation's pretty good, and I think that we do have leverage in that respect for the protection of transit.
I would like to add one quick thing on that. I think we all know that the process we went through with WMATA was about as terrible as one can imagine. I mean, it was so dysfunctional. Jurisdictions were not talking to each other. They were just, you know, trying to intimidate one another and scream at each other. There was just no collaboration at all. So the fact that at least tomorrow, this meeting that the mayor is going to and Councilmember Wright has many of the main players from each of the jurisdictions. I mean, they're very key people from D.C. government as well as Maryland, as well as Montgomery County, and now ourselves are going to be in the same room. I'm not. I don't want to be a cynic, so I'm not going to say it's just window dressing. But if that process could begin tomorrow to actually try to talk about shared goals and ways of making this a decent project, that would be very hopeful. I think it's early to know. but certainly the process before November 8th has been terrible.
The audience does seem to be expanding, doesn't it? And it's including more parties at often higher levels, and that seems like a positive sign.
Josh?
You know, I would agree that we are incredibly disappointed with the WMATA decision. And I think for whatever reason, not a close examination of the facts, because I think when you look at the facts with this situation, they speak pretty loudly about what should be done. And I'm very supportive of the city continuing to fight, battle, and push for what's just and right for not only the citizens of this city, but also for many of the citizens of Washington, D.C., who are affected by this. And it's also making sure that, you know, the focus remains transit. If you think about why Tacoma Park was successful and came into existence at the beginning, it was because it was along a rail hub, a rail line. And I'm a firm believer in thinking about what makes cities and locations competitive, you know, have a competitive advantage in the long term. And I'm very confident in the future that a lot of that's going to be around mass transit and transit use. And so it's very frustrating because it is one of those situations where it's a decision point that's going to affect us and our city on many levels for years to come. And getting this right and making sure that transit is the focus and that we have an effective transit site there will be very important to Tacoma Park's thriving in the future and its competitive advantage in the future. And I thank both of you for your hard work on this issue. I thank you, Sue, for the latest update on the steps that are going to happen next. And I am fully in agreement with Terry that we need to, and Bruce, we need to involve the community in as open a process as possible going forward. So.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you both. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Siemens is keeping a plus-minus record on the end of the meeting.